And there you have it, under the direction of Ridley Scott, Mr. Tim Curry, giving one hell of a performance. Welcome, y'all. Taylor James Johnson here, and I am loving the 80s because Ridley Scott was out there making some amazing movies. And this time, in 1983, he wanted to tackle the genre of fantasy, which seems kind of odd for Mr. Ridley Scott, but you know what? He handled it beautifully. He threw in a young Tom Cruise, he threw in a unicorn, which he later reused this unicorn in Blade Runner, so always reuse your unicorn. Get as much out of a unicorn as you can. But yeah, Legend. It's legendary. A fantasy film that does not rely heavily on those computer special effects. Because it was the 80s. But yeah, I've said this before, the best way to do fantasy is to make it as real as possible, and that's what Mr. Ridley Scott has done. So let's revisit it. Legend.
The 80s were awesome. They were a time of colorful clothes, crazy cartoons, radical tunes, and some of the most iconic fantasy movies ever made.
My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Swords, sorcerers, and synth would reign supreme. Barbarians would rise, kings would fall, and fairies would dance, and we'd be watching it all happen in the comfort of our living room. These were the films that made our imaginations soar. Some were epics, some not so much, but they all helped make growing up in the 80s something magic. So grab your sword, wish on your luck dragon, and fly into the sky with us. Fantasy movies in the 80s were something to behold, magic if you will. Why did that particular decade see the release of so many beloved sword and sorcery epics in film? Maybe it had to do with the fact that kids wanted to escape what was happening outside their own front doors and all of those brand new 24/7 news channels. And thanks to the advent of cable and three very important letters, VHS, they had the ability to do so more than ever. That decade saw filmmakers unleashing their imaginations on the silver screen in a way that hadn't been seen since the days of Sinbad and Harryhausen. Special effects were making the unreal into reality, and the fans of fantasy had a treasure trove of films that would allow them to run away from the mundane into the medieval. One of the best and most breathtaking and troubled of these films is the 1985 movie Legend, directed by one of modern film's most celebrated directors, Sir Ridley Scott. Tom Cruise, one of the biggest movie stars in the world these days, was just coming off of massive hits with Risky Business and All the Right Moves. So playing a forest hermit who partied with fairies probably seemed like a good choice at the time, I'm sure.
Nothing is more
And while
magical.
I'm kidding, sort of, the truth is Legend is in fact one of my favorite fantasy films of all time, if not one of the best. Unfortunately for the film though, audiences wouldn't catch on to this until later. Much later. So let's open the Book of Legend and see how the dark jewel in the crown of King Cruise came to be. Ridley Scott is a household name today, with major film successes like Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, and The Martian to name a few. But in 1985, Scott had only directed 3 films. Granted, those 3 were The Duelists, Alien, and Blade Runner. But back then, Scott was mainly known for Alien and Blade Runner, sci-fi movies. Where Alien had become a massive hit, Blade Runner hadn't yet found the iconic status it has today, and while it made above its budget back, it wasn't a massive hit like Alien. That being said, Scott wasn't what would be considered a quote-unquote regular movie director. A historical piece and 2 science fiction movies under his belt weren't going to secure him a place at the table alongside, say, Martin Scorsese. But Ridley wanted to do a fantasy film, a fairy tale, and he needed to scratch that particular itch before he could get his crime drama Jones on, as well as his Columbus discovering America fix later. But hey, he made Sigourney Weaver a queen in that Columbus movie, and that's as it should be. But Legend was going to be something special. Scott was an artist, not only in the movie-making sense, but also in that he can design and storyboard like a master. He and William Hortzberg collaborated on ideas that would never make it into the film itself because they would simply be too expensive to make or simply impossible to do in a practical setting. Having pushed the envelope with Blade Runner when it came to transporting theatergoers to a future never seen, Scott planned on creating a completely other world with Legend. Legend would take place in a land straight out of Brothers Grimm and classic fairy tales that were familiar to everyone, but it would also be unlike other fairy tales in many ways. The story at first glance seems simple. Jack, a young man who lives in the forest as a hermit, with more in common with the fairy folk than humans, is in love with Lili. Lili visits Jack and learns how to speak the language of the animals of the woods. One special day, to prove his love to Lili, Jack takes her to see the magical unicorns on the one day they will appear. Lili, entranced by the beauty of these creatures, dares to try and pet one. What neither Lili or Jack know, though, is that they've helped the Lord of Darkness in his quest to banish light from the world so that he may walk it again. Lili's distraction gives Blix and his fellow goblins the chance they needed to poison and seemingly kill the male unicorn, brutally cutting off its horn in proof of its destruction. With the loss of the male is all that's left, and with that loss, the world turns cold and freezes. Lili and Jack, on separate paths, must help a brave group of fairy folk to save the world from darkness, both the creature and the true curse of an eternal night.
We must get the alicorn back. Only then will the world return to normal.
That may sound like a straightforward good versus evil scenario, but Legend is a tricky story that speaks to the duality of nature and humanity and what makes good and evil. It also plays with the tropes of the fair maiden and her hero. Legend is all about balance and the two sides of all of us. It's represented throughout the film. Lili and Jack, the male and female unicorns, who together have two horns, just as darkness has two horns, the light and the dark. Darkness himself makes this clear with his final words.
What is light without dark?
We all have darkness within us, whether we want to admit it or not, and that fact is represented perfectly in Lili. Lili is actually a princess, something U.S. audiences wouldn't actually know until later, but we'll get into that in a bit. She's also selfish, mischievous, and as indicated by the previous rundown of the story, nearly the cause of the end of the world because she felt it was her right to pet a mystical and sacred creature. Because, princess?
I'm so sorry.
Seriously though, Lili is not the perfect maiden of purity that you typically find in fairy tales. Besides the moments of selfishness, she's also the aggressor when it comes to her relationship with Jack. This is even more evident in Scott's director's cut, giving him meaningful "hey baby" eyes, kissing him, and is far easier to be tempted. This is made very clear when Lili takes her waltz with her dark reflection, embracing it, while Jack immediately realizes that the jealous fairy Una is pretending to be Lili and quickly spurns her advances. But this also makes Lili a more interesting person and a more relatable character. Jack comes off as almost too childlike and naive. Lili takes it upon herself to fix what she's done, and I mean, who wouldn't be tempted by Tim Curry's darkness? Or is that just me?
I value your thoughts.
Never mind. Moving on. Lili's journey into the underworld and Darkness's fascination with her and his desire for her to be his mate, we're back to that duality again of needing two sides of the same coin, speaks to some of the oldest tales and myths, like that of Persephone and Hades. But Lili is changed by her time with Darkness and the realizations that it has made within her. While Jack does prevail and awakens her back to her non-goth self, Lili is different, and this is shown even more by an alternate ending in the director's cut that has Lili saying goodbye to Jack to accept the reality of who she is, growing up and leaving Jack to remain with the fairy folk. There's a lot of metaphor here is what I'm saying, and the film does it in a way that's smart and beautiful. Speaking of beautiful, let's take a moment to talk about Darkness. Scott wanted to show the devil, but in a way that hadn't really been done before. He's also never truly called out as the devil. He is simply the Lord of Darkness, who went underground to hide from the light. Where the devil and his demons fell from heaven, Darkness has taken his goblins down into the depths of his lair, which looks an awful lot like hell. Within Darkness, we also see a few other myths personified. Scott wanted him to be sexy and seductive, so he took the satyr idea of half goat and half man. Satyrs are notorious in Greek mythology for trying to seduce women or outright kidnapping them. Also within Darkness, we see the Minotaur, another icon of Greek mythology. Darkness's horns and even the way he runs is just like that of a large bull charging. It's damn effective.
You're my prince.
I'm only Jack.
Legend has a look taken straight out of a fairy tale book, and when it came to filming, Scott would go back to another fairy tale film for inspiration. Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast would be the heart of much of the film's look. Scott would include otherworldly and subtly moving statues in Darkness's lair, much like the Beast's castle. Another film that I think influenced some of the underground scenes would be Haxan, a truly creepy and silent movie from the early 1920s that showed some very unsettling demons during its history of witchcraft. The winged demons scuttling about owe more than a little something to their black and white forebears. Scott's look for the forest scenes would be a stark contrast to Darkness's world. Everything would be drenched in light and alive. The scenes would look slightly gauzy, almost as if you were looking at the pictures within a fairy tale book or a painting come to life. This was helped by a steady breeze filled with chicken feathers floating through many of those scenes. It was very important to show the difference between the light of Jack's world and Darkness's land, where everything seemed to be dead and drained of color. The sets were massive, and all of it, for the most part, was done on one soundstage, the biggest in the UK, known as the James Bond stage at Pinewood. There the crew literally created a living forest. Mixed within the giant fake tree trunks, real small plants and trees were spread about along with branches, twigs, and flowers. Real animals were brought in, such as the little bear I call Tom Cruise because he shows up right when Tom's name appears on screen during the credits. Some 200 pigeons were set free in the massive studio, and they would stay there, living in the tall rafters of the ceiling for the duration. The set was literally alive. The actors would only add to the magic that Scott was creating. Tom Cruise was cast as Jack. At the time, Cruise was 23 and was just starting his rise to prominence as one of the biggest stars in the world. He would also start a long tradition that would be carried on by many another actor of being the only character in a world filled with British accents not to have one.
I'm afraid you'll break my heart.
Mia Sara would be cast as Lili. It would be her first film role, and she was 8 years younger than Cruise at 15. Jack, you naughty boy.
You're afraid to kiss me, Jack?
She'd follow this film up with the much wider scene Ferris Bueller's Day Off. She would also marry the son of another fantasy legend, Brian Henson, son of Jim Henson. Sarah said that it hadn't been for the fact that she was crushing pretty hard on Ridley Scott during filming, she might have been a bit more ticked off at what she was put through during the shoot, but the film means a lot to her and is one of the favorite things she's ever done. I mean, if your film career started as a lead in a Ridley Scott movie, that's pretty good. Tim Curry would be cast in the role of Darkness, not really knowing just how much of him would be covered in prosthetics. The role was a grueling one, with hours in the makeup chair and glass contact lenses that a nurse had to put into his eyes on set, while he was also being covered completely in makeup and walking on what was basically stilts. But Scott loved Curry's performance in Rocky Horror and the theatricality that Curry could pull off. Darkness needed to be more than just an amazing makeup effect, and Curry brought the role to life with a personality as big as, well, his horns. The cast would be rounded out with a great crew of fairies and monsters. David Bennett, with his wide eyes and childlike features, would play lead elf Honeythorn Gump. Bennett had starred in The Ten Drum years earlier, to much controversy. Alex Playton would play and voice Blix, the lead goblin of Darkness's forces. If Blix's voice reminds you of Gump, it's because she's also the dub voice for Gump.
Shot be just as sweet as pie.
If Blix's face reminds you of someone, that's because he was based off of Keith Richards. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Take that, Jack Sparrow. These creatures, as well as the others within the realm of legend, came from the skilled hand of Rob Bottin. Bottin is an effects wizard, and well, legend. Prior to this film, Bottin had worked on the 70s remake of King Kong, The Howling, and created some of the most horrifying practical effects of all time in John Carpenter's The Thing. Bottin went to work designing what many considered one of the most stunning creations in the history of the craft with his work on Darkness. His work on The Howling would lead to collaborating again with actor Robert Picardo, who he designed the iconic werewolf transformation for in that film, to create Meg Mucklebones. Meg was a swamp witch in a full-on bodysuit that Picardo would be encased in and then submerged in water. While the character's time on screen is not lengthy, the design in Picardo's performance has made Meg a favorite of film viewers, as she openly flirts with Jack, while also making it very clear she wants to eat him.
What a fine, fat boy you are, Jack!
Filming on the giant soundstage would nearly be completed when tragedy struck the set, but luckily it would happen while everyone was at lunch, otherwise there's a good chance a lot of people would be dead. A massive fire ripped through the soundstage, gutting it. It was fast and brutal, destroying everything that had been built. But it would appear the pigeons knew what was up, and they took off before the roof exploded. The remaining shots would happen nearby the studio in England, with Tom Cruise, doing his own stunts of course, shooting his swimming scenes in Florida, apparently with alligators nearby. But after facing down Meg Mucklebones, who was wanting to eat him, that probably wasn't that big of a deal. The music of Legend is something that has become a story itself. The original cut of the film was scored by movie maestro Jerry Goldsmith. His score was orchestral, with a lot of Celtic influence and what you'd expect a film like Legend to have as its music. It even included Princess Lili singing a tune written by Goldsmith and John Bettis called My True Love's Eyes. But something happened to Legend that would change not just the score that was used, but the film itself. And that something was a test screening. Scott's original cut was a proper epic length at over 2 hours. He then edited that down and showed it to a crowd in the States. The reaction was such that he hacked the film down yet again, shaving off nearly 20 minutes. This version wound up being shown in the UK, while an even shorter version was shown to those of us in North America. But even that version would be delayed by nearly half a year, while Scott swapped out Goldsmith's score for the shorter release and worked with Tangerine Dream, who had worked with him on Blade Runner, for an entirely new music suite that was full of synth and, well, the 80s. It was an odd choice for a fantasy film like this. New wave artist Bryan Ferry and Yes frontman John Anderson were brought in for 2 songs that were added to the final scenes of the film and the end credits, Love by the Sun and Is Your Love Strong Enough, which had its own music video with Ferry walking around singing while scenes from the film were projected on him and a big screen. Goldsmith had worked half a year on the film's score and music, and it wouldn't be heard by anyone in the States in a proper fashion until the film's reissue in 2002, where Scott would add the score back to his director's cut. No one can say if releasing the film with the more traditional score widely would have made a difference on the box office or how the film was originally received. The soundtrack debate still rages on today between the more pop-friendly score from Tangerine Dream and Jerry Goldsmith's traditional sound.
I feel the need for speed.
When the film was released in 1986 in U.S. theaters, it was a commercial failure, making a little over half its budget back. In total, Legend didn't break even worldwide. Was it too fantastical, too traditional, too much for audiences to try and read the subtext of when there are fairies flitting about? Maybe it was all of the above and then some. But then something happened. Legend started growing in popularity over the years, gaining a new appreciation for Botine's effects work and what Ridley Scott tried to create with the film, a classic fairy tale with a modern sensibility that was more adult than what it was trying to say. Home video, DVD, and cable television helped drive this rise. These days, there are fans of the film who hadn't even been born when it was originally released who are introducing their kids to it. In 2002, Scott put back together his original cut of the film, his director's vision, and added back Goldsmith's score on a DVD release that included a ton of extras, as well as the North American theatrical version with the Tangerine Dream soundtrack, and even that odd Bryan Ferry video. Viewers could finally see all that had been missing, from Lily's royal heritage to the fact that not only did Meg Mucklebones want to eat Jack, but Gump threatened to as well. Everyone wants a piece of Tom.
I'll always be here for you, Lily.
The alternate ending was also seen, where Jack and Lily don't actually wind up together, as would be the standard sort of way these things go. I will say, after watching the cut with the Goldsmith score, I prefer the Tangerine Dream version of the music. Maybe it's because that's how I grew up watching it, many, many times. But there's something perfect in how it fits to what the film is, classic with that sheen of modern. It's come to pass that Legend has a legacy worthy of the name. The film brought to life characters before never seen on film, with an artistry that no one else could have done. Bottin and Scott gave birth to monsters and heroes that would make the Brothers Grimm proud. Tim Curry's Darkness has now been recreated in action figure form 30 years after the fact, as has Meg Mucklebones. The cult of Legend keeps growing, with fans making art varying from prints to tattoos and epic masks. Legend's legacy is that of a fairy tale about humanity and the fact that we are imperfect creatures who don't always make the right decisions for the right reasons. It shows us that we can be tempted, but we can also rise above. It's about balance, about the light and the dark, and how we're a bit of both. And it does it in a way that only someone with the determination and imagination of Ridley Scott could. Legend is finally loved by the Sun, and a lot of fans, which is how it should have always been.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. Joe Blow was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.